familiar with Prosperity Indiana and who we are and what we do. We are a membership association for the community economic development sector here in Indiana. Members of the community economic development sector can involve service providers like food banks and homeless service providers. One of our members here is with Foster Success in Indiana. And then we also are joined by universities, local governments, and sometimes even banks, financial institutions, and housing developers that really focus on affordable housing. You can see that pie chart on the left shows the rough breakdown of our membership. Public organizations refers to housing authorities, city governments, things like that. The nonprofit organizations encompasses those service providers that we mentioned earlier. And then we also have private individuals and private organizations, including some corporate members. And those are, we are represented across the state. We're represented in all 92 counties. And the way we go about our work is through what we call our REAP framework. So we provide resources, we engage our members in, networking and collaboration. And we also have advocacy. That's what brings us all here today. That's where we kind of coordinate people across the sector and try to figure out what's the impact, who do we need to talk to, and how do we get those meetings on the books and just really make the nuts and bolts of advocacy happen. And then the last in our REAP framework is programs. Our team that is in programs operates a community loan center, and we also provide some capacity building support and strategic planning and other services to organizations that choose to tap us in for that. Andrew, is there anything I've left out in the kind of Prosperity Indiana overview that you want to add?
I think that's good. And I would just underline that, a reason that we're here for the advocacy part is like, yes, we talk about advocacy and policies, specific bills and legislation, but also we're here to advocate on behalf of the entire sector with a united voice. And it is, providing our members increasing their capacity to be able to advocate for the work that they do, and then all of us together have that united voice. And so that's really a main purpose of this entire series is learning how to raise our individual voices and bring them together. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah. And I think that we're stronger together, and that's the point of coming together in these membership associations and then coming together to do that advocacy work in our coalitions, which we'll talk about a little bit more at the end of the presentation. So we are here today to do the advocacy stuff, and I will hand it to Andrew to just give a quick overview. Our last session was Advocacy 101, and that's where we went over the rules that apply to nonprofits as far as engaging lawmakers and speaking on policy areas or also specific bills. So I will be circulating the link to that first installment of the series. If you weren't able to watch that, you can tag in and get all caught up. But before we launch into Advocacy 201 and start hearing from our panelists, we'll do a quick overview of what was covered in that last session.
Thanks. And this will just be very quick because this is a little thumbnail. I encourage folks, if you didn't get to see 101, go back and look at that because we've had experts in the past who have joined us in that session to really talk about what are the rules. But this is a good summary right here that you see in front of you. We want to emphasize that nonprofits and individuals can and should advocate for their interests. They just need to make sure that they're following the rules. And really the rules apply mostly to nonprofits and organizations. Individuals, really, it's free speech. You're doing what you want following the law. And the distinction here that I think is a helpful rule of thumb is that everybody can advocate. And we break that down to the difference between education and lobbying. You can always educate your lawmakers and policymakers about issues that are important to the work you do. You can explain how certain policies do or could affect the people that you work for and work with. Lobbying, that's where some of the more rules apply. That's what the 101 session is about. But when some basic rule of thumb there is that if you're making a specific ask about a specific piece of legislation, then you may be in the lobbying ground, and you want to make sure that you are tracking that and that you are counting those hours and that you're not billing those to sources if you have funding from charitable foundations. That's what 101's all about. And the one thing I'll leave you with here, the red electioneering, that's really what we don't get into. It's a type of advocacy, but it's not a type of advocacy that nonprofits can get into. And actually, later this year, we will have an initiative that gets more into how you can educate voters and candidates, and it's not electioneering. But for now, I think that's a high enough level summary. And Rachel, I'll turn it back to you.
All right. So as we get into the strategies, where, we are all able to advocate and educate and in some cases lobby. But where it can be really helpful, I think, is to hear some examples from people who have been in the field and doing this work. I think one of the biggest barriers there's Advocacy 101, in which we try to overcome that kind of psychic barrier of, I don't think I'm even allowed to. But now that we've kind of covered, oh yeah, you're allowed to, we wanted you to hear from some people as far as how do I go about it then? And that is where our expert panelists will be able to just bring so much to the discussion. And I'm very grateful that they're all here. The top 3 strategies that we will be hearing from them about today are developing ongoing relationships with legislators. It is hard to have a positive working relationship with a local lawmaker if they only hear from you once every other year. And also sharing strong stories. So as people who work in social services or who are just active and engaged community members, we're seeing the impact of policy all the time. And being able to illustrate that to a lawmaker who is sometimes making a decision in relative isolation from the impact of the decision, we want to be able to have a good faith conversation and share stories of impact so they understand what's going to happen depending on their vote. And then also identifying and utilizing the most effective angle. Different people are persuaded in different ways. I have tremendous sympathy when I hear a heartstring story, but I know what ultimately gets me going is a lot of data about the cost effectiveness and the impact per dollar of investing in human capital. I know that is what turned me into a lifelong social services person. That was the argument that persuaded me to dedicate my career to this work. And I think that's how you would reach me, but other people are reached in different ways. So now I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll give you their name, their organization, and then I'm going to kick it to the panelists to just give us a quick overview. And I'm going to ask them a few quick questions just to get us started. And then once we get through that, the opportunity is going to be for you, our audience, to ask them questions. So in the chat, feel free to go ahead and drop your name and your organization just so we know who you are. And that way, when I tag you in, I can introduce you properly. And then also just be thinking about what questions you might want to ask any of these panelists as we kind of get through the first couple of minutes by hearing a little bit of an introduction from them. But then it's your webinar. So feel free to take notes on some questions you want to ask, and we will get into it. So we are going to start with Jen Trowbridge. She's the executive director or the chief executive officer of CoAction. Jen, you want to come off mic and say hello?
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I always like to share a bit about things that I find helpful and might work.
Excellent. And I'm curious to know from you, can you tell us a little bit about CoAction and the type of organization you are and who are sort of the big stakeholders when you're speaking with lawmakers?
Yeah, so we're located in the northwest part of the state, and we cover a pretty large territory. There's 7 counties there, but Lake, of course, is pretty special. We have several distinctions. So we're a community action organization, which means we're an anti-poverty organization. We're also the area agency on aging, trying to help people age well. We manage nutrition. We like to name drop WIC because a lot of people can identify with that. So we manage the WIC program and other nutritional supports. And then the other piece is that we are a community housing development organization. So we are building housing and rehabbing it. So these four distinctions are really what's in our portfolio and makes us, a pretty strong and large entity to engage legislators with pretty much every session.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And when you are talking with legislators and other policymakers, how do you describe what co-action is and the work you do in a way that lays the foundation of an advocacy relationship? And then are there any priority issue categories for you? How have they changed over time?
Yeah, I'm glad that we're talking about strategy because it's the how that I think makes a difference for you to have a second conversation and a third conversation. We're a complex organization, so I don't want to share with them those distinctions I just shared with you, not in my immediate approach. I really want to talk about the role and responsibility that I have. I need them to connect that I am well involved in their constituents, and especially for financial stability, those who need housing stability, and those who are trying to age well and age until end of life in their community. And so when I connect with layman terms, if you will, about what we do, that really helps set the stage of interest because almost every legislator can identify with an aging parent, constituents that call because they're frustrated due to lack of affordability for things, et cetera, et cetera. So once I do that, then it really is kind of focused on accountability. So I'm a part of this large organization that we are, accountable to federal laws, state regulation, and local outcomes. So there's a lot of richness to what we do to show what works and maybe what doesn't work. And then I also like to talk a little bit about scale because they need to understand when I mention these subjective words, I don't want them to think that I'm giving them fluff. I don't want them to think that I'm over exaggerating. And so I do try to give a little bit of crisp data, but not to overwhelm them. It's such a balance, right? So I like to share things like, we're serving around 40,000 people a year in these programs that help people find housing they can afford, make sure they reach financial stability, and that they can age well. And so we're exposed to a lot of components that I think could be helpful for you as a legislator. So I think that's kind of where we go. And then if it's not an intro, if it's a secondary, a third, maybe a 10th time, we've connected, then I'm really talking about the change. So I try to rekindle a few things, but then I also remind, like, why am I talking to you? Most recently, Senate Bill 285, right? Why am I talking to you about 285? Well, because of the work that I do in housing stability, I can tell which bills are creating a path for helping us reach housing stability and which ones have elements that might have a long-term effect to weaken housing stability. And so I try to build some credibility there.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll move on to our next panelist. When you're working with lawmakers on those kind of varied priorities, how do you strike a balance between education and lobbying? And then when do you decide, like, this is an issue where education's going to be the tool that I choose versus when it's time to put on the gloves and do some lobbying?
It is a continuum. They are blended. The difference is education to me always feels like there's less pressure to it. So education is what I'm really trying to do in between session. And I guess my philosophy is when I'm reaching a legislator to either lobby for a bill or even try to ask them to hear me out so I can talk about maybe a bill that's not, maybe it's not fully baked yet. It's still in the early stages. I have to have relationships with them outside of session because I feel like when I'm asking them to do something for me, it's almost like a favor. So I know that sounds weird, but I'm asking them for a favor to hear me out. I'm asking them for a favor to vote no on a bill. And so when you're constantly asking for favors, that means you got to build up a good kind of I don't know, like a little toolbox, whatever, of a lot of things that you've done for them to build on that relationship. And so in between, it's really about connecting with them, not as legislators, but as community people. These are people we should care about because they're in our communities, right? So we care about them in that method. And then when we have these asks, right, we're talking to them and we're lobbying. But on the education side, I just try to drop things here and there, and it's really about connecting again to the responsibility we have and to how the work that we do absolutely has an effect on financial stability, housing stability, aging well, those kind of things.
Yeah, I like that idea of communicating in the language of responsibility because we all have a responsibility to each other. We live in a society. All right, I'm going to move us on to our next panelist. We have Rabbi Aaron Spiegel, who joins us from Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick and tell our audience members a little bit about you and GMA?
Sure. Generally set the bar high, so I'll see if I can reach it. Aaron Spiegel, Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance, GMA, because it's a mouthful. We are an advocacy organization, obviously working in the faith community. Our issues are housing, and even more specific there, the evictions and homelessness crises in Indianapolis.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm curious, with a multi-faith coalition, I'm curious how you have built that coalition over time, and when you're bringing in new faith communities all the time, how do you identify those common goals and keep your, wide variety of members moving in a united direction?
Yeah, that's the special sauce. It's tough to quantify. But I think the important distinction first, we're not a member-based organization. I like to say we're truly an alliance. And we don't try to represent every view. It's also probably important to understand we were birthed out of a research project at NYU on civil dialogue. So the relationships and relational versus transactional is the basis of everything we do. We have an idea, it's not really a program, called Sacred Friends, and it really is about knowing each other, not knowing about each other. And through those friendships, then we can do advocacy work around the issues that we've identified, which is evictions and homelessness. Does everybody agree with what we do? No. But as Jen was saying, they're often doing me a favor by going along with some of the stuff they might not agree with. We're very clear about our values, and one of the most important one is radical hospitality. I believe that civil society, we've lost the skill of disagreeing with civility, and if we can't do that internally in an organization, I don't know how the heck we're going to do it with legislators. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's as close as I can get.
Oh, it was great. Thank you so much. Um, and so GMA is the Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance. You're primarily based in Central Indiana, but you've told me in the past that your advocacy really takes on a statewide approach. So how do you balance that notion that lawmakers are typically primarily focused on their constituents and the geographic region that they serve, with strategies to reach the full General Assembly? Because none of us can determine the fate of a bill by only changing one vote. There's got to be this statewide kind of critical mass.
Right. It's tough sometimes, but we're most interested in systemic change. It's great to get, I guess you'd call it episodic wins, but the system that we have, not just in Indiana, but in the country, that keeps people from insecure housing is the same system. Certainly in Indiana, evictions are a direct pipeline to homelessness. So when we figured that out, it was pretty obvious that if we don't change state law, we'll never get anything, we'll never get systemic change in the greater Indianapolis area. So it wasn't rocket science. Indiana has some of the, people keep telling me the worst. We are the worst. I wouldn't disagree. Tenant protection laws in the country. And until and unless we change that, our work around stopping evictions and preventing homelessness is not going to happen. So it's not been a tough problem when I go see legislators. In some ways, it might even help because some of them have an anti-Indianapolis bias, and I can sort of put a face to Indianapolis that maybe is a little less confrontational.
Sorry, some herbs to make it just clear liquid chicken broth.
Sorry, I just realized I was on mute. But I was making a great point. I just want you all to know. Thank you so much for that. And I think just to keep us on pace, I wrote down some questions that I want to follow up with you about if we have time, but to keep us on schedule, I'm going to move us on to the next panelist. Is that all right, Rabbi Spiegel?
Of course.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up, we have Leslie Townsend Cronin. She is the Executive Director of the Homeless Coalition of Southern Indiana. You want to come off mute and introduce yourself and tell them a little bit about your organization?
Sure. So my name is Leslie Townsend Cronin, and we have the Homeless Coalition of Southern Indiana. We're kind of a couple of things all wrapped into one. We serve, the coalition itself serves Clark, Floyd, and Harrison counties. We also are a region's continuum of care, and so we serve the 8 different counties. Region 13, if anybody knows what the continuum of care is, we're Region 13. And so we provide some services in those other counties, but essentially we're really located in that Southern Indiana, Harrison, Floyd, and Clark counties. We are an organization that does a lot of things. I consider us a hybrid organization. So part of us is advocacy and advocacy, community building, and collaboration with local organizations in order to bring change. And then the other piece of us is actual direct care. So we do provide our local housing stability program, which helps prevent evictions. We are in the affordable housing space, trying to make sure that we are helping build affordable housing, helping with that effort that's going on in our local community, and then helping with some barriers along the way of people who are either at risk of becoming unhoused or are currently unhoused, and we are helping get them back on their feet and find them the appropriate resources.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is kind of a similar question for you that we asked Jen, but when you're talking with policymakers, how do you describe who you are and what you do? And how do you kind of use that to lay the foundation of the advocacy relationship? In particular, I'm curious how you're able to emphasize that kind of like place and local impact to lawmakers who might think that homelessness isn't a problem in some of their communities.
Absolutely. So one of my tactics personally has been, I really start at ground zero, which is our local communities, and then work our way up. So it is easier to advocate for bills and things like that and things to be put in and out if we have a really good relationship with the people that are closest to us. And so that's been one major piece that we've made sure we do. So our local government, our local mayors, and then we branch out to our local representatives, and then we kind of branch out from there. And so one of the things that we try to make sure that we do, and this sounds kind of cheesy, but we try to make sure that we're relevant. And so we need to make sure that we're up to date on what's going on, up to date with what the what's going on in our community, what people are seeing, what organizations are seeing, what neighborhoods are seeing. So we really try to make sure we get out there, and we are the information holders. We are the ones that really focus on deciphering that information. And so we find our relationship with our local legislators a give and take. And so we offer information. We also, offer to take some of their initiatives with us if we have to, as long as we agree with them. But I think Rabbi Spiegel talked about, or maybe it was Jennifer. So somebody already said that making sure that you've got that relationship and that it is a give and take relationship and not something that is constantly asking for something and constantly needing something, that you've got to have that partnership. And having those relationships with people is really important. So when you see them out, you go up and you talk to them as a human being and not necessarily as a legislator, so that when you do finally get to that point where you have to ask for something, that they have a relationship with you and they trust you. And once that trust is there, then that advocacy can really start to build. And then that does filter out to other legislators that you may not know. If they've got a relationship with the person, it could start to trickle out that way as well.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm curious, thinking specifically about stories of impact, and effective stories being a key advocacy strategy, you work in a particularly sensitive area. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about how you approach when, where, and how to most effectively bring in those stories for, Hoosiers experiencing homelessness, and how you work them into a broader conversation and a longer term relationship with legislators.
Sure. So I think one of the things we try to make sure when we're advocating is it's not just one person's story, that it's got to be multiple stories, because one person is one person, but if you can bring together, it's a group. I feel like it's that old saying of, like, if you've got one matchstick, you can break it, but if you have a whole box of matches together, you can't break them. And so, really trying to, in your storytelling, bringing together multiple issues, unfortunately, I hate to say that, when it comes to evictions and things like that, that you have to have multiple to make an impact, but you really do. If you've got multiple people talking about their landlords are not keeping their residents up to date, and yet they're still evicting, or we've seen some housing discrimination, try to bring in the fair housing people from the cities. Once you start to gather that information, then you're really able to take it to your legislators and say, this is a problem. And 9 times out of 10, in my experience, the legislature is already on the radar. They already know that that these aren't issues in their community. It's just a matter of making sure that they understand that it's not just something that they're feeling, but it's also something that we're feeling, and also make it relevant. So an example of there was some piece of legislation that was trying to be passed last year, and through the grapevine, we had heard that one of our local legislators was wanting to vote yes when we wanted them a no vote, based on their experiences in a different county in Indiana, not even the county they were representing. So what we did at that point was we called personally and said, this is a representation of your community. We had people backing us up, including local law enforcement and things like that, saying, please vote no. And really was able to not necessarily change that person's mind, but recognizing that the reason you're voting yes on this is for something that's completely irrelevant to the community you're supposed to serve. So, and you do it kindly. It's not something you do when you call them out on it. You got to make sure that you're nice, again, putting the icing on the cake, but really making sure that, and that's also, if you do it kindly, is to make sure you don't alienate that person either. So again, it's got to be, my experiences is those stories. You have to make sure that it's not just one that you're advocating for, that it's multiple. And this is where collaboration with your local community, organizations, because one thing that we really do is we have a local collaboration with all the organizations that, it's not just in the houseless world, it's in health, and it's in all these other things. If we're all seeing the same things, we come together as a collective unit and really make an impact on legislation.
Excellent. And I'm going to move us on to the next panelist. I do have some follow-up questions for you as well. But again, that's if there's time at the end of the session. But before we move on, could you really quick just restate the counties that your coalition serves?
Sure, I'll just drop it in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much. Oh, I just put myself back on mute. Next up, we have John Willie. He is the founder and principal of 19th Star State Solutions. John, can you come off mute and just give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Rachel and Andrew and Prosperity, for the opportunity to spend a couple of minutes with you today to talk a little bit about advocacy and why it's important. I started this firm 10 years ago with the idea that I wanted to help a variety of different organizations. I started the firm after almost 20 years with corporate America doing their public affairs, government relations, you name it, both at a state and federal level. But it was a singular issue, wonderful company, but really wanted the opportunity to branch out and work with different organizations in a variety of different capacities. Wanted to be able to learn different industries and different types of organizations and help them cut through regulatory red tape. Because as we've talked a little bit about, being over at the State House can be intimidating talking to legislators. I think, Rachel, you mentioned it, wow, can I actually do that? Can I actually walk into that building? And wanted to be able to help people understand a little bit about the process and why it's critically important for them to be involved.
Awesome. And so you are one of your clients, and sort of what connects you to Prosperity Indiana's work and priorities is that one of your clients is CHIP. So can you tell us a little bit about the history of your work with CHIP in a contract capacity and what you've worked on with them and some of the unique assets and perspectives that you bring to the table as a contract lobbyist?
Yeah, so it actually started when I was working in corporate America, and I was out having lunch with an individual who was serving on the CHIP board, was chairperson of that particular board, and recruited me to help with that particular organization. I, didn't know anything about it, but I had been living downtown, and so I had seen and experienced individuals or been approached by either those who truly were homeless or at least maybe in some cases panhandling, but ended up going on the board, serving for almost 8 years, 2 years as chairperson during one of its most tumultuous times before the organization was eventually rebuilt. And so having that background, once I cycled off the board, was approached by that same individual about maybe taking over some of the lobbying services for that particular organization. This was, of course, after I had left corporate America. Did that for a number of years and actually shared the client with another lobbyist in the hallway, which was a great, we worked very well off of each other. The organization then went through some additional changes, leadership changes. They pressed pause on their lobbying efforts. I had stayed in touch with Chelsea, who's now and has been the executive director for a number of years. And we reengaged a couple of years ago just because she recognized that as the organization stabilized, that the number of issues that came before state government that could be critically important to the organization and other organizations like Prosperity and Rabbi Spiegel's and everybody else's groups, that they really needed to come up as part of their policy agenda with making sure that they've got somebody at the State House day in, day out that can help intercept potential issues, but then also try to get in front of it and create a dialogue with legislators that is ongoing, so that we can be subject matter experts. So when issues do arise, they have somebody that at least can be, at the front lines on my end, but then know too that when needed, we can bring in Chelsea and other individuals to help talk to legislators about legislation, why it's important or why it may be problematic.
Ooh, you set me up so well for my next question. Thank you. I'm curious to know, like, you do have a kind of unique role as a lobbyist for whom that is your week, meeting after meeting after meeting, and you have these long ongoing relationships. So when are the moments that you see in kind of the life of a bill where it is most impactful for service providers, their volunteers, their supporters, their board members to be getting involved?
Yeah, so I think it was Jen who brought it up at the onset during her discussion that when you are actively engaging with the legislator during a legislative session, they are distracted, right? They are OCD. I mean, they see something shiny and they're going in a completely different direction. And you have to have your elevator speech, your 2-second speech. You're grabbing people on the fly. You're not having the opportunity to have a really good, solid discussion about the issues, especially from a policy perspective, just because people are being pulled in 1,000 different directions. So it's a long process, advocacy, and so having those relationships and building those relationships outside of the legislative session, so that when you're coming in hot on a particular issue or an amendment gets filed or something that you need to be able to turn on a dime and react back to a legislator, to some degree, hopefully you've established some modicum of a relationship or something that when you approach the legislator, they see you as a trusted source. And at the end of the day, a lot of times if I'm coming to the table and I'm approaching a legislator, depending on the issue, they know what's going to come out of my mouth, but hopefully I've helped my client meet and have conversations with legislators in and out of that, in and out of session, so that when they have to come into the building, or it coming into the building is needed from a strategic standpoint, that there's not a lot of time of saying, oh, well, who is Chelsea? I don't know Chelsea. No, what's your organization and what do you do again? Hopefully you've established that so that you've got a much shorter runway, and you're not having to spend a lot of time sort of working backwards with perfunctory introductions and going over. You can walk into that relationship, or at least that particular meeting, with some sort of foothold and some background with that legislator, so that you're able to efficiently not only use your time, but more importantly, you're efficiently using the client's time.
Excellent. Thank you so much, all of you, for those substantive introductions. I would like to now turn it over to the audience. If you would like to ask one of the panelists a question, go ahead and use the raise hand feature, and I'll give you a quick introduction just so we hear your, actually, you can introduce yourselves. What am I saying? You can come off mute and feel free to just introduce yourself with your name and organization and ask your question. I do have some questions written down, but I also want to make sure that the audience has first pass.
Hey, Rachel, as you start to think about questions, maybe something to lead the conversation. I think that,
Sure.
I think you hit it off at the start. Don't let the building or the people in it be intimidating, right? I mean, you have absolutely every right to contact your representative, which is, that's sort of the first hurdle, right? Is going on, and you can go on to www.iga.in.gov, and you can use that public resource to find out who your legislator is if you don't. Your legislator is a part-time legislator, right? So they traditionally will have a full-time job. And obviously at, the 150, we've got attorneys, we've got small business people, we have people who are involved as undertakers, former CEOs of companies, teachers. It runs the complete gamut. So it really is, in its true sense, a citizen legislature. But finding who that is and making a contact just to their office is incredibly important. And even out of session, or even on the weekends when they're coming back, outside of serving during the week, they're going to the local library because the local Chamber of Commerce has a third house session and wants to provide updates to the community. So take the time to go to those particular free public events where the legislators are highlighted, and take a chance just to go in and introduce yourself and get to know them in anticipation of potentially advocating for something down the road.
Excellent. Yeah, I know another such free, open to the public event where lawmakers sometimes attend. It takes place in the fall. It's called Prosperity Indiana's Policy and Pizza Series. So, you can all keep an eye out for those in August and September of this year. Haley, thank you so much for your question. Go ahead and come on in.
Of course. Hi, I'm Haley Sanford. I'm the Director of Engagement at Coburn Place, which is a domestic violence agency in Indianapolis. We house survivors and their children for up to 2 years rent and utility free. So prior to this year, or I should say prior to 2025, as a direct service organization, we kind of just followed in the footsteps of the legislative arm of domestic violence in the state, the coalition. And so we, in the last year, with all of the funding cuts and all of the different threats to our operation, we have decided to draft a policy agenda and to start getting a little more involved in the education and advocacy space, not only with our donors and volunteers, but also trying to reach out to legislators as well and build some relationships with stakeholders as well. So I guess my question is, we are trying to toe the line of being a direct service organization that doesn't necessarily set the policy priorities or agenda for the statewide coalition of domestic violence agencies. And so as a local organization that is wanting to dip our toes into policy and advocacy, I guess, does anyone have any advice on how to toe that line and how to do that effectively?
This is Jen. I would love to talk about that a little bit, Haley. I do have a quick follow-up question for you though, which is, are they consistent? They might be different, the state policy advocacy and maybe what you want to do on the local level for policy, but are they conflicting or just slightly different paths because you have a greater need maybe in your area?
Yeah, I would say it's not necessarily conflicting outside of the fact that we might want to speak up on something that maybe they don't. And
Yes.
so,
Okay.
yeah, that's the
Totally relate, like a lot on that. And
Mhm.
so, you know, part of the challenge with being a provider of a certain geographical area is we do have to rely on other entities to help us build that rapport and relationship and policy. So like for us, Prosperity has been fantastic for that. And that's what we lean on them for, because I can't be in Indianapolis and I can't be there when they're in session all the time. I'm 2.5 hours away. And we have our associations that help. But there are some things that absolutely affect co-action. That's not just about the clients. It's the effect of whether we can legally and responsibly operate. So there are some bills that get in the way of hindering and affecting our wait list. It's not about us and our capacity to serve. It's about the policy restrictions that add to wait lists. And so those are some things that we have to navigate. So a couple things. I do believe that we are pulling on favors every time we ask a legislator to hang out with us, learn from us. So I do balance that. And if it's conflicting, that's a problem. And I haven't come across that yet to give you expertise, but they generally don't. But I do have some initiatives that are stronger in our area. And that's when I target our local legislators. They should understand that. They're feeling it, their constituents are feeling it. And if they're not feeling it, then it's how can I get them some exposure to that? And I go back to Leslie's talk of storytelling, et cetera. But how do I get legislators to understand that there's some local demands due to several cultural things that are going to elevate some bill shaping in our area specifically that are in addition to maybe what the Prosperity or State Association is pushing on. And so I don't neglect what they're trying to do, but I also have to be realistic that I'm hired to run this organization that represents all of these people, and I have a mission to try to uphold. And so I do have to balance that and be conscious of it. So my how is I think you can do it both. And if you have specific examples, find me, LinkedIn, Facebook, my contact information's here, and I'd be happy to soundboard something with you.
Rachel, can I add something?
Please do.
Hi, Haley. On the policy side, unless you're able to hire someone full-time to do policy work, hire a lobbyist. And John's not paying me for this. Lobbyists aren't just there to do lobbying. The first 2 years we worked with somebody, they did no lobbying for us. It was just navigation of the systems and figuring out what the heck our policy priorities were. I guarantee that saved me 10 years worth of work, at least. So it's well worth the money and it's not horribly expensive.
Yeah, I will say, as somebody who's a relatively new entrant to this line of work, I am amazed by some of the things that I am like learning as I go. And the benefit of tagging in an expert right at the beginning is you will get to learn from them and just really economize on your time. Um, I want to throw a quick question to Leslie. You said something that I was very interested in because you mentioned building relationships with local government. So I'm wondering, are there tactical differences between how you go about that relationship building for the local government versus your state representatives? And then I'm wondering, how do you use those to complement each other? Are there times that you tag in one for help with the other and vice versa?
So yeah, so I think with the local government, I mean, there's two very different two very different outcomes that they're working for. So local government, they're thinking more about their community. They're thinking more about a very small geographic region versus your legislators are looking at larger geographic regions and have higher level ideas. Whereas local, like particularly like if you're looking at affordable housing and the zoning, and then that can transfer over to legislators. So I think that um, I feel like a lot of the government people know together or know each other. They talk together, they sit and have lunch together during session and things like that. And so sometimes, again, that building those relationships and building that rapport with people translates over into the broader, Indiana, the state legislators versus and even national ones, versus just your local. So I've got some really great relationships with our local legislators. Some of them I've built through board members. Some of them I've built through tackling very local issues and then being brought in to the very local issue and then working through it that way. But I think that in the grand scheme of things, I have very different reasons why I'm going to different people in form of government. So for a city council person, it might be for a very specific issue with something that specifically is going on in their community versus that issue is you know, is a symptom of a much broader issue. That symptom of a much broader issue, I'm going to go to the state legislators and talk with them about. And you can pull those things together because if you're talking to a local city council person, town council person, whatever, um, them recognizing, yes, this is a problem with, organization A, B, and C. And then they take it to our local and they're like, you're not the only ones we're hearing this from. We're hearing it from, across the state. Then it becomes a broader issue. It becomes we're tackling the root of the cause instead of just a symptom of the issue. And so that's really how we have been able to maneuver that. I think also too is that sometimes having that really good rapport with your local government gives you the backbone to really start to address the broader Indianapolis State House. Somebody said, it can be scary. Don't let it scare you. There are people too. And that's very true. But if you've got these local relationships, it gives you, as at least it did me as an individual, enough like, okay, I know what I'm talking about. I've got evidence. I've got support. I've got local support. Then there's this, next step of going to your local legislators and bringing that issue to them as well.
Excellent. And I think I want to throw this question to everyone that's on the call, because I really like that you mentioned, sometimes that connection comes through a board member. And I think board members are a useful kind of axis for us to talk about today. Because part of the reason people are on boards is that they have influence. We think that the organization can benefit from their ties as far as bringing in new donors and making good decisions, and they really understand the mission and purpose of the organization and want to support that. So how do you for those of you who have boards of directors, how do you engage boards of directors and say, it would really help if you kind of got coffee with, this guy that you went to college with who happens to be in charge of this committee? Or for those of you who are yourselves board members, how do you balance your involvement when it comes to issue advocacy as a board member and in your professional capacity? So anybody just come on in.
Well, I think that kind of capitalizing on the previous discussion, twofold. One, I think there's a recognition that if you're already involved with, town councils, town board, city council, whatever the case may be, there needs to be some recognition that if you're already engaging those people locally, that's more often than not kind of the feeder system for those individuals who are going to take that next step and be elevated to a state senator or state representative. So starting those conversations early, I think are incredibly important. From a board perspective and utilizing, those that have boards, I think it's important and it's easy enough to just do an inventory with that board to ask the simple questions of, listen, we as an organization are continually finding that we are facing more and more legislative issues or issues that affect who we are and the people that we serve. So I need to, I need to do some sort of, backgrounder for each of the board to say, do any of you in this, serve on this board, do you have relationships with legislators, right? Do your kids play soccer together? Do you go to the same church together? And I think you'd be surprised to find that many board members maybe already have some of those existing relationships, which it's been discussed can be, terrifically important, especially when times are fast and furious, and they've got a direct line to that particular legislator because of an existing relationship.
And then I'll call attention to a follow-up question from Ms. Sanford. So if you're not in a position to engage a professional lobbyist for either legal reasons or financial reasons, and you're really going to be relying on, task forces and committees of people who are, they have those kind of ties to the lawmakers that John was just mentioning. How can you go about that process, and what are some bits of advice you would offer somebody who's taking on that work? And Rabbi Spiegel, feel free to jump in, or Jen or Leslie, if either of you have insights.
We do that. This is Jen. We do that and ask our board just to get engaged. And we don't have a sophisticated system there. It is what it is. But we create talking points, we use data, and we really craft things for how people can approach it. It's the how that gets missing. And I think, we can share with people what they should do, or like just get this started. But a lot of people just get stuck in, but how? Where do I begin? How do I recruit people who are policy experts? How do I get my board engaged? And so when you start talking about the why, the impact, why it's important, how people do respect titles. So if you're a board member, they just tend to listen to you. If you're a CEO, executive director, sometimes just those titles hold value for folks. And then the talking points need to be unemotional, but they need to bring it back to how it impacts them, because this is a human issue. Politics are human issues. Bills getting passed and not passed are people issues, and relationships and human issues. And so having the how we talk to people is important. And I think the biggest takeaway that I always tell our board too is you're not going to reason with people if you make them feel that they're wrong. And so we can't make people feel that they're wrong. And the opinions that some of our policyholders have, they are wrong. They're just misinformed and they're wrong. But we can't say that. So we have to craft ways that validate why they came to that conclusion. We resonate that conclusion. This is what the information shows. And we were just like them until we learned better. So those kind of things.
And if you lose your temper, you've lost your argument.
Yes.
Kind of to capitalize on what Jen's saying. You lose your temper, they're going to shut down. You've lost the argument.
Yep, there's a wide gulf between cathartic communication and effective communication.
This is the best way to lose, to go in like this.
Excellent. Well, I want to be conscientious of time, and we are coming up on the 2:00 hour. So anybody who wants to stay after and ask some additional questions, please feel free. I'm going to move us through our closing slides and take us out with my colleague, Andrew. But thank you all so much for attending Advocacy 201 with us. I dropped a link for this in the chat, but it will also come in on the slides. We have the link to the Find Your Legislators that will come out in the slides, so you can find out who's your senator, who's your representative, and also, that their listing takes it all the way up to your federal elected officials. So that's a really great resource. And you can also use it to check out your legislator's webpage, find out what committees they're on, any bills that they've authored this session. So that's another great resource. And then there are ways to get involved with us. We certainly hope that you will join us for the final installment in this series, which is Advocacy 301. We have some further expert panelists who are joining us from Indiana United Ways, United Way of Central Indiana, and an additional kind of freelance or contract focused person who focuses a lot on utility pricing. So some really, really great and experienced people to hear from. And we also encourage you to join us for Prosperity Indiana State House Day. That is where you will get to face any fears you have about entering the State House and participate in meetings with lawmakers. We will be providing talking points about some key legislation that we're watching, but you will also be able to have, your conversation with your lawmaker is your conversation. So you'll also get to see the State House. We'll have some pastries and some bagels and some coffee. There will definitely be coffee. And that is on Thursday, February 12th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. So it's also a half day. So even if you've got some travel that needs to take place for you to be there, you'll still be home in time for your evening. And then you'll also have the opportunity to take a tour of the State House, observe committee hearings, and most importantly, speak up to your lawmakers about the legislation that's going to impact you. Lastly, I want to go over the coalitions that I mentioned earlier. We have our Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition that's really focused on stability and affordability of the housing stock and supply, and also tenant protections and housing equity. That is where we do a lot of discussion about eviction protection and other aspects that, like habitability and the enforcement of habitability standards. So if you're concerned with the quality of and accessibility of where people live, the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition is going to be a great way for you to stay abreast of what bills are moving through the legislature and find opportunities to contact your lawmakers. The Indiana Assets and Opportunity Network is really focused on what we kind of broadly define as economic opportunities. So that's financial education and empowerment, that is supporting families in developing savings for their future, and also safeguarding the public and the public benefits and programs that can really stabilize families of modest means. So that's another great one to consider. And finally, we have our Hoosiers for Responsible Lending Network. The short version of this is we are the watchdogs for payday lenders. We want to make sure that they are not setting out to financially exploit our neighbors, but there are, as the financial world continues to diversify, Hoosiers for Responsible Lending has stepped into other areas to make sure that access to credit is, it's available, it's equitable, and it's responsibly offered. And I would love to say that we were going to win the payday lending fight tomorrow, but I think this coalition is going to be around for a while. So feel free to email me after this presentation if you're interested in joining any of those coalitions, if you want me to register you in a teammate for State House Day. My email address is rcheeseman@prosperityindiana.org, and the purpose of this series is to make sure that you feel educated and empowered to participate in advocacy work. So if you feel educated and empowered and want to do it, we've tried to make it really easy for you to get involved. So feel free to reach out to me after this presentation, and thank you all so much for joining us. And now my screen has disappeared, correct? Okay, great.
Screen disappeared, and looks like the audience has left us as
And
well.
now
So
most
thanks,
of our
everybody.
audience too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to stop recording.
And I think it does. Yeah.